In this video, we're going to begin object-oriented programming, which is actually something that you've been doing since day one in this class, whether you realize it or not. When we use things like cout, cin, those are objects. The difference is somebody already created those for us, and we incorporate them into our programs by checking them out of the library with this little routine at the top. Now we're finally at the point where we can start creating our own objects. And why would we want to do that? Well, you know, the intrinsic data types or the primitive data types, the ints, the floats, even the string object, those will only get you so far. What if you wanted to create a data type to really represent a real entity that you would use in a business application, like an employee or a student or a book or some kind of merchandise item for a store? You can do that using object-oriented programming. And I'm talking about going beyond just like the names of things and social security numbers and titles and stuff like that. It's almost that what we're going to be doing, if you can recall from chapter 4, the struct was really like a collection of variables all stored together in a nice little package. And then we did functions in chapter 5, which is really that's just like a segment of code that accomplished some kind of task. Okay, segments of code that run when you call them. And really, object-oriented programming in this chapter is really a combination of these two. So we'll see something similar to the structs where we're establishing a little collection of variables, but also adding to this package code that does stuff, functions basically. So let's do a class here. All objects begin with a class. This is like the plan for the class, or for the object. So I'm at the top of my program here. And why don't we do a class that'll represent a dog for like a vet's office or something like that. So we begin with the keyword class. We choose a good name for our class, just like we did with the struct, just like we do with variables. And then you're going to lay out a curly brace sandwich and then end it with a semicolon. Don't forget that semicolon. Okay? And basically now we'll create our what we call data members. And these are like the variables that will be in the package. Things about the dog that I care to keep track of, like maybe the dog's name, maybe the breed, maybe the dog has a microchip and we want to store the chip number. So that's what we'll do here. Basically, here's a difference right off the bat from the struct. With the class, you typically want to add this word, meaning private. And what this means is that if you can think of the class as like a house, the data members, these variables that we're going to add, like the dog's name, the breed, and so on, are going to be contained within that house and inaccessible from outside of the class. And you're probably thinking, well, why would we want to do this? For security reasons, for just to keep your data secure, keep it intact. So it's not accessible to all of the functions in the program. Keep in mind that programs in real life are very large, many functions. They are many functions, many different files that make up the program. And if you have your data completely accessible at all times, it really threatens the integrity of the data. So that's why we want to keep our data members private. And then we'll have to talk about ways to get at this data because it's going to be locked up inside the house. And so we have to provide some kind of backdoor access to that. So let's begin by adding some data members here. So we'll do a string. Notice I do have string up at the top, so that's why I'm able to do this. And we'll do the dog's name. And then a string for the breed. And then why don't we do like an unsigned int for the chip number. Remember, unsigned means there are no negatives, so we get twice as many possibilities for chip numbers in the positive direction. Okay, so there we have it. So if I had made this a struct, with the exception of the word private, if I had said struct instead of class, it wouldn't have been really anything new to you. So here we just have a collection of variables to represent the dog. Now we did mention though that the class is different from the struct in that it has variables and it can do things too. It has functions inside of it. So let's just add a couple of functions. Functions are typically public because they're not like variables where it's very important to keep them kind of locked up and hidden from the outside world, so to speak. But so you'll typically make your functions public. And there is a section in your book that specifies that data members are usually private, and member functions, as we call them, I guess I'll type that in, member functions are typically public. Okay, and you can use that as a rule of thumb. Is it always like that in every program? No. But in this class, you can absolutely make that your rule of thumb. That's how we'll be doing things with our small programs in this class. So let's see. Dogs bark. Why don't we do like a bark function? And we'll say, okay. And let's also do a growl function. Okay, so here is our dog class. And our class has data members, variables that represent certain things about the dog that we care to track. And the class also has member functions, meaning things that the dog can do. So what we've done is we've created our very own brand new data type, and it will represent a dog in some kind of vet program. All right, so let's go down here into main and create a dog variable, define a dog variable, and these variables are called objects. So finally, we are creating a dog object. Notice the difference in the terms. The class is just like the plan, okay? We're just kind of laying it all out like the blueprint, and then finally we're ready to create an object here in main. So we type the name of the data type, which is what we called our class dog. And why don't I just call this dog D1? Okay. And so now I have an object in memory that I could work with. Let me just real quickly, I'll execute these two functions here. We'll have D1 bark and growl. Okay, and we'll run this. Okay, there's our dog barking and growling. You can see the results there. Okay, but what about, giving the dog a meaningful name, recording the breed, recording the chip number? I'd like to do those things as well. So if this were back in Chapter 4, I would just say, okay, the dog's name is Max. Okay, and you saw with the IntelliSense, all of the things pop up. The breed, the chip number, the name, our two functions here. When I go to run this, it's giving me an error. I'm going to say no, and look at what we have here. It says, name cannot access private member declared in class dog. And what does that mean? When we said that these are private, our data members, that means that they are inaccessible to the outside world, and main is part of the outside world. Okay, so see what I mean? The data is locked up and inaccessible. And in order for us to be able to use it, which is the whole point of even having it, we have to provide some kind of access to that data. And we do that in the form of a public function. So this is like the backdoor access that I was talking about. So let's, I like to keep my, data access functions first thing in the public section. You don't have to. I could have added them below the bark and the growl. But let's, your book uses something like set data and show data. So why don't we do this? We'll say void set data. And we have to have three things coming through the door. One for the name, one for the breed, a string for the name, and a string for the breed. And then finally an unsigned int for the chip number. Okay, and once these things are passed into the parameters, I can populate the private data, name, breed, and chip num with the values that are coming in. So we'll say name equals N, breed equals B, and then chip num will equal chip. Okay, so using the values passed into the parameters, dumping them into the private data members, because I'm inside the class here, I'm inside the house, I have direct access to the private data. It's when I'm outside of the class that it becomes a problem. Okay, so now why don't I go down here, and so we know that we cannot access name, chip num, or breed directly from here. Look at, even you see the little padlocks, meaning it's locked up. You can't access that. But we do have access to set data, which I have here. So we'll say set data, and now I'll pass the arguments. We'll say the dog is named Max. The dog is a Great Dane. And we'll give Max a chip number of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay? So that'll put data into the private variables, private data members. Now what about getting it back out? That's an issue too. So we have to provide some sort of access to get the data back out. I think your book uses something like show data, which will just basically print the items from a function, and that's what we'll do here. So we'll maybe do like a cout, and we'll say name, and then we'll do the breed, and then the chip number, that should do it. Okay. Oh, and I guess I have to call that from main if I want to see the data printed out. So that's a show data. And this doesn't have any arguments because it's not a parameterized function. You see, it doesn't need anything. It has access to everything. It's inside the house, so it has access to the name and the breed and the chip number, so we're set. All we need to do is print it at this point. Okay, so let's go ahead and run that. And there you have it. So to recap, we have the class, which is kind of like a combination of a struct with functions added to it. We keep our data members, the variables for the object, private, typically. And then we have to provide some kind of access to those private values in the form of public functions, public member functions. Okay, and that's what we have with the set data and the show data. Now also, we've added a couple of more functions just for additional functionality to serve the purpose of the program. So you'll have like a mix of functions. Some of them provide data access, like these top two, and then other ones will be just, whatever's needed for the functionality of the object. Then finally, when we have the plan in place in the form of a class, we come down to main, we create the object, and then we can call our member functions from there, assuming that they're public, which you will make them public. Again, you cannot directly access private data members. You see the little padlock there, they're locked up. You need to go through the functions. That's what they're there for.